I was on my way to my daughter's house for dinner when my lawyer sent me a message, "Call me immediately." My heart sank. When I called him back, what he told me about Julia, my own daughter, shattered everything I thought I knew about family. My name is Lester Hayes. I'm 66 years old, and for 35 years I've built Hayes Innovations here in Chicago. I started with nothing but an idea and a rented loft, and today, it's one of the strongest software firms in the Midwest. I always believed every sacrifice I made was for my daughter Julia, for her future. But I was wrong. Because now, she isn't waiting to inherit what I built. She's trying to take it from me, while I'm still alive. Before I dive into my story, I want to know, where are you watching from today? And as you listen, let me know in the comments how this story makes you feel or if you've ever experienced something similar. Your thoughts mean a lot to me, and I'd love to hear your perspective. I had just finished reviewing the quarterly projections for Hayes Innovations, the company I had built from a two-man coding shop into one of the Midwest's most respected software firms. My pen was still resting against the page when my phone buzzed. The name on the screen froze my blood. Daniel Morton, my attorney of 20 years. The message was short, brutal, impossible to ignore. Call me immediately. Emergency. About Julia. My heart clenched. Julia, my daughter, my only child. She was the reason I worked late into the nights, the reason I poured 35 years into this company. Every sacrifice, every missed school play, every canceled vacation, I told myself it was for her future. Hands trembling, I dialed Daniel's number. He picked up on the first ring. His voice was low, urgent, each word cutting like glass. "Lester, I need you to stay calm. But you need to know. Julia has filed a petition in court. She's asking that you be declared mentally unfit to run Hayes Innovations." For a moment, the world outside my window blurred. The Chicago skyline, steel, glass, concrete, tilted as if my balance had been stolen. "What are you talking about?" I whispered. That's impossible. She's my daughter." Daniel sighed. "She's gathered support from several shareholders. They're claiming you've lost touch with reality. That your recent decisions are erratic, sentimental, guided by emotion rather than strategy. They're building a case that you're no longer competent to lead." I gripped the edge of my desk, the polished oak suddenly cold under my palm. My mind raced back through the last year. Had I raised my voice in board meetings? Yes, when a lowball acquisition offer insulted everything we'd built. Had I defended funding community programs? Yes, because loyalty mattered more than squeezing pennies. But now those moments, my passion, my convictions, were being twisted into signs of decline. "Who else knows?" I asked. Daniel's voice was grim. "The filing is sealed for now. But she's recruited allies, Elliot Grant, Patricia Wheeler, 2 others. They're meeting tomorrow. She's promised higher dividends under her leadership. She's selling them a future without you." I sank back into my chair, staring out at the frozen Chicago River below. My own daughter. The girl who once sat on my lap while I wrote code, who used to say she'd run the company with me someday. She wasn't waiting anymore. She was plotting to take it all. How much time do I have? 1 week. The hearing is next Friday. We need to prepare everything: financial records, medical evaluations, character witnesses. You need to prove your competence, Lester. This is going to be war. I closed my eyes, the weight of it all pressing down like the January wind. Just 2 days ago, I had been planning to announce her promotion. Within the year, I had wanted her to step into my shoes. Now she was trying to rip them off my feet. "Don't confront her yet," Daniel warned. "We need to understand their strategy first. Let me build the defense." When the call ended, I sat in silence, the hum of the city outside muffled by thick glass. The walls of my office were lined with plaques, photos, awards, meaningless now if my own blood was trying to erase me. That evening, I was supposed to go to Julia's house for dinner. Our weekly tradition. The thought of sitting across from her, eating roasted chicken, making small talk, while she prepared to destroy me, It made my stomach twist. But maybe I needed to go. To look her in the eye. To see who she had become. As I left my office, the cold Chicago air slapped me across the face. Steam rose from the grates, traffic snarled under the glow of streetlights, and the river flowed dark and silent beneath the bridges. The city felt harsher that night, its steel and stone reminding me of the battles I'd fought to get here. I hailed a cab and gave the driver Julia's address in Lincoln Park. As we pulled into traffic, my reflection in the window stared back at me. Lined face, silver hair, tired eyes. But beneath it all, I felt something awakening. Not fear. Not grief. Strategy. If Julia wanted war, she would learn the same lesson I taught every rival who had ever underestimated me. You don't bet against Lester Hayes. Chicago at night is a city of contradictions. The skyline sparkles with wealth and ambition, but the wind that whips down the alleys is sharp enough to cut through bone. That night, as the cab carried me home from Julia's dinner table, I felt both, the glittering lights of a city I had conquered, and the chill of betrayal colder than the January wind. Julia had smiled, poured me wine, asked about my health as if nothing were wrong. Her hands moved with the same precision in the kitchen that she now wielded in the boardroom. The roast chicken tasted like ash in my mouth, every word out of her lips rehearsed. Only my granddaughter's laughter had felt genuine. When Julia hugged me goodbye, it was like embracing a stranger wrapped in my daughter's skin. I couldn't sleep that night. So at dawn, I called the one man I still trusted without hesitation, Henry Wallace, my oldest friend and the former CFO of Hayes Innovations. If Daniel was my shield in court, Henry was my compass in business. Together we had weathered recessions, market crashes, even near bankruptcy. If Julia thought she could erase me, she would have to erase Henry too. We met in his private office overlooking the Chicago Board of Trade. The old brass clock on the wall ticked steadily, a reminder of battles fought and won. Henry looked up from his desk as I entered, his heavy frame leaning forward with concern. "You look terrible, Lester. What happened?" I closed the door behind me. "Julia happened." His brow furrowed. "Tell me." I told him everything. Daniel's call, the petition, the hearing date. Each word seemed to harden his expression until his jaw was clenched tight. When I finished, he opened a drawer and pulled out a folder already thick with documents. "I was afraid of this," he said quietly. "I've been hearing whispers. Promises Julia's been making. I didn't want to believe them until I saw the numbers myself." He slid the papers across the desk. I scanned them, my stomach tightening with each line. Promises of 15% dividend increases to shareholders, 20% salary raises across engineering, 30% for department heads. New stock options she doesn't have authority to create. I dropped the folder onto the desk. That's fantasy. Even with full automation, those numbers aren't sustainable. Henry nodded grimly. "Doesn't matter. It's what they want to hear. She's selling them a dream. Fast profits, bigger payouts. And people always buy dreams, even if it bankrupts them." I stared out the window at the frozen streets below. Delivery trucks crawled past, steam rising from the grates. Chicago looked solid, permanent, but I knew better. This city loved nothing more than tearing down its giants and replacing them with something shinier. Julia was feeding that hunger. "There's more," Henry said, sliding another folder forward. 3 separate transfers. $850,000. Pulled from company accounts, masked as consulting fees. Moved into shell accounts she controls. All in the last 2 months. The numbers blurred in front of my eyes. My own daughter, using my own company's money to fund her rebellion. "That's embezzlement," I muttered. "That's betrayal," Henry corrected. "If she were anyone else, we'd already have the auditors swarming her. But she's your blood. She thinks that makes her untouchable." I sank into the chair opposite him, rubbing my temples. "I raised her to lead this company one day. Not like this. Never like this." Henry leaned forward, his voice firm. "Lester, you have to stop thinking of her as your daughter when you're in this fight. She's not your child in that courtroom. She's your rival. And if you hesitate, she'll bury you." The words stung, but I knew they were true. I straightened, forcing steel into my spine. "Then we fight her the way we've fought every rival. With evidence, with strategy, with precision. No sentiment. Not anymore." Henry nodded slowly. "Good. Because she's already working the shareholders. Elliot Grant and Patricia Wheeler are on her side. She's targeting Victor Miles next. If she gets him, she has a majority." "Then we don't let her," I said flatly. We spent the next 2 hours mapping out names, alliances, weaknesses. Loyal shareholders who trusted me. Undecideds who could be swayed with facts. Employees who would testify to my leadership. By the time the brass clock struck noon, my desk was covered in papers, a battlefield of numbers and names. Henry looked at me across the mess of documents. "You built Hayes Innovations from a rented loft in Logan Square. Don't forget that. You've beaten tougher enemies than this." I nodded. But inside, the ache of betrayal lingered. Julia wasn't just any rival. She was my daughter. That night, back in my apartment, I stood at the window overlooking Lake Michigan. The water was dark, restless, the waves slapping against the frozen shore. I thought of Julia as a little girl, sitting beside me while I typed late into the night, asking questions about code I thought she'd never understand. I thought of her smile when I told her someday the company would be hers. Now, that same girl was coming for my throat. I poured a glass of bourbon and whispered to the empty room, "You should have remembered who taught you how to fight." Because if Julia wanted war, I was ready to remind her what real war looked like. The morning of the hearing arrived with the kind of sharp cold only Chicago can deliver. Wind slicing down LaSalle Street, flags snapping against the courthouse columns, the sky a steel-gray dome pressing low over the city. I had walked into battlefields before, negotiations that decided whether my company lived or died, confrontations with rivals who thought they could undercut us. But as I climbed the marble steps of the Richard J. Daley Center, briefcase in hand, this battle felt different. This wasn't just business. This was blood. Inside, the courthouse buzzed with energy. Reporters filled the aisles, their cameras flashing as if each shutter could capture the essence of betrayal. Shareholders packed the benches, eager to see which way the wind would blow. Employees whispered, torn between loyalty and the promises Julia had fed them. And there she was, Julia. My daughter sat at the plaintiff's table, her dark suit immaculate, her hair swept back into the same severe bun her mother once wore to board meetings. But her eyes weren't Eliza's. They were colder, sharper, honed for combat. She didn't look at me when I entered. She didn't need to. The distance between us was already a canyon. Beside her, Veronica Blake adjusted her blazer with the smooth precision of a predator preparing to strike. Veronica was infamous in corporate law circles, the kind of attorney who turned family disputes into theater. She had built her reputation on dismantling patriarchs, convincing juries that seasoned leaders were nothing more than relics clinging to power. The judge, Honorable Raymond Kessler, entered. 70 years old, stern, with the kind of face that could silence a room with a glance. His gavel struck once. Case number 2025-318. Marshall versus Hayes Innovations, Incorporated. The court will hear arguments regarding the competency of Mr. Lester Hayes to continue leading the company he founded. The words hung in the air like a funeral bell. Veronica rose first, her voice smooth, practiced. Your Honor, this case is not about greed. It is not about ambition. It is about protection. Protection of shareholders, protection of employees, and yes, protection of Mr. Hayes himself. My client, Julia Hayes, has watched her father deteriorate under the weight of grief and age. His decisions have grown increasingly erratic, sentimental, and financially reckless. For the good of the company, and for the good of her father's legacy, she seeks temporary guardianship of Hayes Innovations until he can be properly evaluated. Her words were velvet-coated steel. She gestured to a screen as graphs appeared, competitors outpacing us, automation sweeping the industry, while our growth line remained steady but unspectacular. While others embrace progress, Veronica continued, Hayes Innovations clings to the past. Loyalty over profitability. Sentiment over logic. This is not innovation. This is decline. Then she called Julia to the stand. My daughter walked to the witness chair, placed her hand on the Bible, swore to tell the truth. Watching her sit there, where strangers once testified against me in business disputes, was like watching a ghost wear my child's skin. Julia, Veronica began softly, tell the court about your father's recent behavior. Julia's voice was steady, rehearsed. My father resists every attempt at modernization. He dismisses new strategies, mocks automation, and grows agitated when challenged. He makes decisions based on nostalgia. For example, when I suggested redirecting funds from my late mother's foundation to more profitable initiatives, he grew defensive, even angry. He's no longer able to separate personal emotions from corporate leadership. Her words sliced me open. My wife, Eliza, had believed in that foundation. To Julia, it was just a line item. Veronica pressed on. And what about shareholder confidence? Julia nodded. They're worried. They see competitors racing ahead while we stagnate. Employees are frustrated. Our culture is warm, yes, but culture doesn't pay dividends. She looked directly at me then, her eyes hard. My father confuses stability with strength. But stability without progress is death. The courtroom murmured. Her performance was flawless. When Veronica finished, Daniel rose for cross-examination. He adjusted his glasses, his movements deliberate, his tone calm. Ms. Hayes, he began, can you remind the court of last quarter's profit margin under your father's leadership? Julia blinked. 12%. And the quarter before? 11.9. Daniel's voice sharpened. So despite his supposed incompetence, profits are rising? Julia's jaw tightened. Short-term increases don't indicate long-term viability. Daniel nodded. And employee retention? What's the current rate? 93%. He turned to the jury box. Industry average is 67. So Hayes Innovations has higher employee satisfaction, higher loyalty, and rising profits. All under Mr. Hayes's supposedly failing leadership. Veronica objected, but the damage was done. A ripple of uncertainty spread through the gallery. Daniel pressed further. Ms. Hayes, is it true your father approved cloud services in 2020? Remote work expansions in 2021? Machine learning divisions in 2022? These are modern strategies, are they not? Yes, but... No further questions. Julia hesitated, her mask slipping for the briefest second. When court adjourned for the day, I remained seated as the gallery emptied. Shareholders whispered, unsure now of which side to favor. Reporters scribbled furiously. Veronica whispered into Julia's ear, but her client didn't look at her. She didn't look at me, either. Daniel leaned close, his voice low. She struck hard today. But tomorrow, we strike back. Evidence. Lester. Hard evidence. We're not playing defense anymore. I nodded, my eyes fixed on Julia as she walked out of the courtroom. My daughter. My enemy. Tomorrow, I would remind her that loyalty and stability weren't weakness. They were the very weapons that had built this empire. And I still knew how to use them. The second day in court felt different the moment I stepped inside. The chatter of shareholders had changed in tone. Yesterday, they whispered about my decline. Today, their voices carried doubt about Julia. Daniel gave me a firm nod as I sat down at the defense table. Today, he murmured, we cut the legs out from under them. Judge Kessler entered, his gavel cracking against the desk. Court is now in session. Mr. Morton, you may proceed. Daniel rose with calm precision, the kind of man who never needed to shout to command attention. Your Honor, the plaintiff has argued that my client is unfit to lead Hayes Innovations. But the truth is very different. Today we present evidence of deception, financial misconduct, and manipulation, committed not by Mr. Hayes, but by his accuser. He walked to the projector, raising a folder. Exhibit 19. 3 unauthorized transfers from Hayes Innovations corporate accounts, totaling $850,000. These funds were moved into shell entities controlled by Julia Hayes. The money was then used to hire consultants, lobby shareholders, and fund the very legal action against her father. The screen lit with bank statements, dates, amounts, account numbers, the kind of evidence no lawyer could spin away. The courtroom erupted. Gasps, murmurs, whispers. Even shareholders who had leaned Julia's way now sat frozen, their faces tight with shock. Julia's head snapped toward Veronica. Her lawyer's face stayed composed, but her knuckles whitened against the table. Objection. Veronica's voice rang sharp. This is irrelevant to the matter of competency. Overruled. Judge Kessler cut her off. This court will hear it. Continue, Mr. Morton. Daniel's voice sharpened. This isn't just incompetence. This is embezzlement. A betrayal of shareholders, employees, and family alike. He flipped to the next exhibit, internal emails. Promises written in Julia's own words. Engineering will see a 20% pay increase by Q4. Department heads, expect 30%. New stock options available after restructuring. These, Daniel said, holding the paper aloft, are promises that cannot be fulfilled. Even with full automation, the math does not work. Julia Hayes is not saving this company. She is committing fraud to buy loyalty. The room buzzed again. Investors shifted in their seats. A few glared openly at Julia. Veronica stood quickly, her tone icy. Ambition is not fraud. These are proposals, projections. Projections. Daniel's voice cracked like a whip. He slid the final folder across the table. Exhibit 27. Security recordings. Ms. Blake, coaching her client on testimony. Directing her to use specific phrases, emotional cues, false examples, witness tampering, Your Honor. That did it. The courtroom exploded into noise. Shareholders turned to each other in disbelief. Reporters scrambled, pens flying. Julia sat frozen, her face pale. Veronica blanched but tried to recover. That's preposterous. Those recordings were obtained legally by building security sweeps, Daniel said coolly. We have audio and transcripts. Judge Kessler's expression darkened. This court will review those recordings immediately. If accurate, sanctions will follow. The tide had shifted. I could feel it. Then Daniel called me to the stand. I walked slowly, deliberately, every step measured. My years felt heavy on my shoulders, but my resolve had never been sharper. Mr. Hayes, Daniel began, how long have you led Hayes Innovations? 35 years, I said clearly. I founded the company in 1989, with $40,000 borrowed against my house. Today we employ over 2,000 people, with annual revenues exceeding $1.8 billion. Have you ever been declared incompetent by a medical professional? No. Last month, at my attorney's request, I underwent a full evaluation. Cognitive, psychological, physical. All results, normal. The reports were handed to the judge. Verified. Clean. In your opinion, Daniel continued, why is your daughter pursuing this action? I looked at Julia. Her eyes avoided mine. Because she confuses vision with greed. She believes modernization is about slashing jobs, maximizing dividends, cutting loyalty out of the equation. But modernization without people is destruction. Stability is not weakness. It is strength. I am not incompetent. I am consistent. That's how I built this company, and that's why it stands today. The silence that followed was thick, almost reverent. Veronica rose for cross-examination, but her questions stumbled. Mr. Hayes, isn't it true you resisted automation in customer service? Yes, I answered evenly. Because firing 200 loyal employees would have gutted morale. Instead, I implemented a hybrid system, AI plus human oversight. Customer satisfaction rose 12%. Profits followed. She shifted, flustered. And you funded your late wife's foundation instead of expansion. Yes, I said again. Because we stand for more than numbers. And that investment built trust that no marketing campaign could buy. Trust is worth more than short-term profit. Her voice faltered. The cross-examination ended. As I stepped down from the stand, I caught Julia's gaze for just a moment. Behind the mask, I saw it, fear. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt the tide turning. When court adjourned, Daniel leaned toward me, his voice low. Tomorrow is Judgment Day. And from where I'm standing, Lester, it's already over. I nodded, eyes fixed on Julia as she walked out, her steps uncertain. She had declared war. But now, she was the one bleeding. The morning of the final hearing dawned cold and brittle, the Chicago wind howling through the loop as if the city itself were bracing for a storm. I stood at my office window on Wacker Drive, coffee in hand, staring down at the river below. The courthouse loomed just blocks away, a fortress of stone where my future, and my daughter's, would be decided. I told myself I was ready. I had faced worse battles. Hostile takeovers, recession collapses, competitors who wanted to bury me. But as the clock ticked toward 9, I realized none of those fights had ever felt like this. I wasn't just defending a company. I was standing against my own blood. The courthouse was buzzing when I arrived. Shareholders packed the benches, reporters jostled for position, the gallery crackled with anticipation. I caught sight of Julia at the plaintiff's table. She wore navy blue this time, a softer color, but her face was carved from stone. Beside her, Veronica Blake adjusted her files with mechanical precision, though her eyes betrayed unease. Judge Kessler entered, his gavel striking once. This court will now hear final arguments. Veronica rose, her voice sharp, her gestures crisp. But the desperation underneath was impossible to hide. Your Honor, despite yesterday's distractions, the facts remain. Mr. Hayes clings to outdated methods. He resists progress. His judgment is clouded by sentiment, not strategy. Hayes' innovations cannot thrive under such leadership. My client seeks not to destroy her father, but to preserve his legacy by ensuring competent guidance for the future. Her words floated hollow in the air. The shareholders weren't nodding this time. They were frowning, whispering. They had seen the evidence. Daniel stood slowly, deliberately. His presence filled the room without raising his voice. Your Honor, the plaintiff would have you believe this case is about progress. But what it is truly about is power. Julia Hayes attempted to take this company not by merit, not by vision, but by deception. She embezzled $850,000. She promised employees raises that would bankrupt us. She manipulated shareholders with numbers that don't add up. And she rehearsed false testimony, coached by her counsel, to make her father look incompetent. He turned, letting his words cut through the silence. This is not protection. This is betrayal. And if Hayes Innovations is to survive, it must not fall into the hands of someone willing to destroy it for ambition. He sat. The courtroom buzzed with murmurs, shifting bodies, the sound of truth settling like lead. Judge Kessler cleared his throat, his expression grave. I have reviewed all evidence, testimony, and documentation. This court finds no grounds for declaring Mr. Hayes incompetent. His leadership remains sound. His evaluations confirm his fitness. His record demonstrates stability, not decline. Relief surged through me, but it was tempered by what came next. Furthermore, the evidence presented against the plaintiff, financial irregularities, false promises, and potential witness tampering, raises serious concerns. This court refers the matter to the state's attorney for review. The petition is dismissed. Mr. Hayes retains full control of Hayes Innovations. The gavel fell. For a moment, I just sat there, the words echoing in my ears. I had won. The company was mine. My name, my legacy, safe. But across the aisle, Julia sat motionless. Her shoulders slumped, her hands trembling against the table. She looked smaller than I had ever seen her. A woman who had gambled everything and lost. My daughter. My rival. My child. As the gallery erupted, shareholders rushing to shake my hand, reporters shouting questions, I rose slowly, my eyes never leaving Julia. She finally looked up. Her eyes were red-rimmed, glassy, filled with something I hadn't seen in months. Pain. She whispered, barely audible over the noise. "Dad!" For a heartbeat, the courtroom around me disappeared. It was just the two of us, a chasm of betrayal and blood between us. I wanted to reach out, to remind her she was more than this mistake. But then Veronica tugged at her sleeve, pulling her toward the exit. Julia let herself be led away, her gaze dropping back to the floor. I had my company. But in that moment, victory felt like ashes in my mouth. Daniel clapped my shoulder, his voice firm. "You did it, Lester. You proved them all wrong." I nodded, but my eyes stayed on the door where Julia had disappeared. I had defended Hayes Innovations. But I had no idea if I could ever rebuild what mattered more. The war was over. But the question lingered, heavier than any verdict. Had I just saved my company by losing my daughter? Chicago was warmer now. The brutal winds that had cut through February had softened into April breezes, carrying the smell of rain off Lake Michigan. The city was waking up again, outdoor cafes filling, joggers circling the lakefront trail, the river dyed green for St. Patrick's Day fading back to gray-blue. Life moved on. But inside me, the storm hadn't cleared. Yes, I had won. Hayes Innovations was safe in my hands. Shareholders had rallied. Employees felt reassured. The press painted me as the indomitable patriarch who had fended off betrayal. To the world, I looked stronger than ever. At home, though, the silence was deafening. The company was mine, but my daughter was gone. For nearly 2 weeks after the verdict, Julia didn't call. I didn't expect her to. When I saw her leave the courthouse, eyes down, shoulders slumped, her lawyer tugging her toward the exit, I thought that was the last time I'd ever see her. Then, one evening, as I sat in my study with a glass of bourbon and the city lights glowing through the window, my phone buzzed. A single message. Coffee. No lawyers. Just us. Millennium Park. Tomorrow. Noon. I stared at it for a long time before typing back, yes. The next day, I arrived early. Millennium Park was alive with spring energy. Tourists snapping photos by the bean, kids chasing each other through the fountains, office workers eating sandwiches on benches. I found a quiet spot by the edge of the park, where you could still see the skyline rising like steel teeth behind the trees. Julia arrived 10 minutes late. No navy suit this time, no courtroom armor. Just jeans, a pale sweater, and tired eyes. She carried herself like someone twice her age. "Dad," she said softly, almost uncertain. "Julia." For a moment, we just stood there, the noise of the city moving around us like another world. Finally, she sat on the bench, and I joined her. She spoke first. "I didn't do it to hurt you. At least, that's what I told myself. I thought I was protecting the company. But the truth is, I wanted you to finally see me, to admit that I was ready, that I mattered." Her words cut deeper than any courtroom accusation. "You always mattered," I said. "I just failed to show it. I thought building this company for you was enough. I thought success was love. But I see now, I confused providing with parenting." Julia shook her head, her voice trembling. "All I remember is missed birthdays. Empty seats at school plays. Every time Mom begged you to come home for dinner, and you said the company needed you. I thought if I beat you at your own game, maybe then you'd notice me." I looked out at the skyline. Towers of glass and steel, built by ambition, now reflecting the golden light of the sun. I noticed, Julia. Every success of yours. I noticed. I just didn't know how to say it. And that silence. It built this war between us. She wiped at her eyes quickly, not wanting strangers to see her cry. "I nearly destroyed you. I nearly destroyed everything. You forced me to confront what I refused to see, I said gently. That family is more fragile than any company. And if we don't fight for it, it can collapse overnight. Silence stretched between us, but it wasn't hostile this time. It was honest. Finally, she asked, "Do you still want me at Hayes Innovations?" I turned to her. Not at Hayes. With Hayes. With me. As a partner. Her eyes widened. Kosos. I nodded. Your vision. My experience. Balance. You were right about modernization. I was right about culture. Together, we can make it work. She let out a shaky laugh. After everything? Because of everything, I said simply. For the first time in months, Julia smiled. Not the calculated courtroom smile. A real one. She leaned in and whispered, "I love you, Dad." I reached across the bench, covering her hand with mine. "I love you too, Julia. Always." Weeks later, we stood side by side in the Hayes Innovations boardroom, presenting our joint vision. Gradual modernization, employee profit sharing, new AI initiatives balanced with loyalty programs. The board approved unanimously. Employees cheered when the announcement went public. Shareholders finally saw what they wanted: stability and growth. But for me, the victory wasn't the press release, or the market response, or even the surge in our stock price. The real victory came that evening, when Julia invited me to dinner, not as rivals, not as CEO and plaintiff, but as family. Her daughter, my granddaughter, sat at the table, crayons scattered in front of her. She handed me a drawing. Stick figures labeled Grandpa and Mommy, standing side by side in front of a big glass building with the words Hayes Innovations. "Is that us?" I asked, smiling. She nodded proudly. "You and Mommy. Together." I looked at Julia. She looked back at me, her eyes softer than they had been in years. The company was safe. The family was healing. And for the first time in decades, I felt like I had finally built what truly mattered. Not just an empire. A future.